Okay, so welcome to the Imaginal Soul podcast. I'm so glad that you're here today because we are in for a real treat. I am delighted to welcome, a woman who, firstly to me, is a friend and professional colleague, a teacher of mine, and a joy to have in my life, Imelda Almqvist, a shamanic practitioner, a shamanic teacher, an author, a painter, a mother, and an all-round pretty amazing woman who is shining her light strongly so that all of us can find our way forward. So Imelda, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an absolute privilege, and I think we're going to have a very important conversation. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're here today to really have a look at how we as individuals can work with practices of peace, how we hold that concept in our awareness, what it means, what we have to do to be able to show up, to really be able to work with it in fullness. I think there is a huge feeling of disempowerment right now when we look at the state of the world. And so that is going to be the topic of our conversation. And Imelda, I would like us to start. Would you share what did you do when you woke up on that morning and discovered that Russia had invaded Ukraine after weeks, months, years of it being in the waiting? What did you do? Can you share that with us?
I went straight to my desk and I wrote a social media post about love and war, sharing my thoughts about how I see they are entwined, and also how, the way I see it, unless we really understand the dynamics at play, we will never understand other key manifestations of, love and war in our society either. So I wrote a very passionate Facebook post, which has since turned into a blog. And I've had a lot of reactions on that. And a lot of people have written to me privately about that post. Because I just felt I needed to speak, like I couldn't stay quiet and not share what I saw.
Yeah, and I've read that post and the power of it and the call for us to understand the place of war, the place of love, the place of peace. So I really encourage anyone and everyone to go to Imelda's website. Imelda, obviously the link to your website is below, but please, for those who may be listening right now, rather than watching, could you share your website?
Yes, that is www.shaman-painter-healer.co.uk, which I know a completely stupid website title, but I made it years ago, not thinking it was going to take off. So that's what it is.
And it has taken off indeed.
Big time. So now I can't change it anymore. So yeah.
I remember I had just got out of the shower and my husband had seen the news and he said to me, it's actually happened. And still in my towel, I just stood and I allowed that information to begin to move through me. There can be such a reaction, can't there? My husband shared with me that he felt really angry that suddenly our children were being presented with this immediately straight after the pandemic, that the children of the world were now facing this kind of pressure, angry that someone could still feel like they had the right to invade another country. He really felt anger. For me, as I stood there in that towel, I went straight to my altar and I lit a candle, and that for me grounded my intention of holding the peace. And then through the day, I returned several times to the anchoring of my altar, which, I'm aware for many people, you may not have an altar, but maybe you have a piece of a shelf or a mantelpiece or windowsill that for you house some sacred work on. So I think we're all responding differently to this. And what I would love us to bring forward here today is any any ways that people can do this, what I think of as the simple and powerful things that actually can align our systems with peace. Maybe Imelda, how do you hold peace in your system? I think that's a really great question for people to think about. How do you, and I don't just mean peace for Ukraine, but when you're upset, or if your family are presenting big challenges to you, or your publisher is presenting challenges, how do you hold peace in your system?
Well, for me, that's always about doing shadow work. Actually, on that same morning, the news came, our youngest son, who is going to study political science, he was so shocked by the news that he was so ill. I had to actually keep him off school for a day, and he had a mock exam, which he had to resit later. But I actually kept the child off school that day because I considered him to be too unwell to go to school. So that was another thing I did on that day. So in terms of holding peace, for me, it all comes down to shadow work, because when these things happen, we get so provoked and we can get so triggered. And I think when difficult things happen, that's where the triggers live. And I've certainly observed that in myself and other people, that for me, that I get much closer to my aggressive self, the warrior in me that wants to sort of, do something back or strike back, or, like I really, when I heard the news, got so triggered. I had quite unpleasant encounter with my inner warrior, realizing that it's very easy for me to condemn what's happening in the Ukraine, but it's not actually a very far step to find that impulse within me, to find within me that sort of desire to go right back in and go into my sort of military self and do something. But that's not the way to go. So in terms of the practice for peace, for me, it comes down to shadow work. Because the moment I can own that within myself, then I can also, I'm not saying that I approve of it, but I can understand better where the other person, well, in this case, the leader of Russia, I don't even want to say his name, like where that is coming from. And by owning it within myself and using that as a kind of mine where I can go and dig up the gold and the diamonds, I can at least understand what that impulse is and why it takes that expression. But the thing is also, I don't really want to put myself on the level of bringing that frequency into the world. So then what I do instead is that, like, within myself, I resolve it by owning it, by healing it, by using spiritual practices until it sort of is balanced within myself and within my own mind. I can hold the vibration of peace again, and also a vibration of forgiveness. Because once you truly understand where other people come from, in some ways, sometimes it's very difficult, but to forgive them can sort of set you free from that immediate tight situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I really hear two key things in what you just said then, Imelda. One is that we need to be the vibration that we wish to see. And two, that forgiveness is one of the ultimate ways that we need to find our alignment within those challenging situations. And forgiveness, that takes an immense amount of shadow work, I think.
It does. And also, I just want to also say that obviously it's not for me to forgive, what's being done to people in Ukraine right now. It's a humanitarian disaster, on an unmentionable scale. So I don't sort of mean that I sit here and I forgive that would give completely the wrong impression. But it's more when I work with my inner warrior, my inner impulse to be aggressive, it helps me forgive those people who like met me from a place of repression or abuse, and I can find it in me to forgive them. And then I sort of drop my internal load. So within there is more space to hold, compassionate, sacred space for people in the Ukraine or Palestine or Syria or Bangladesh or all the other hotbeds in the world where things are happening. And things happen in our own culture as well. We have children suffering in domestic battle zones and cyberbullying. We've had a pandemic now followed by a war, which has a huge impact on the mental health of our young people. So, it's also, of course we need to look at Ukraine, but we also need to look closer to home, where maybe there's even more in our power to actually act and make a difference.
Absolutely. And I would say that concept of forgiveness is often we need to go even closer to home and forgive ourselves. That place of harsh critical judgment on ourselves for ways that we have acted. And that's a difficult place to kind of find our way through, isn't it? And shadow work is a key grounding in your life, in my life, in our teachings. And at the same time, understanding that takes a certain amount of energy, determination, commitment to show up to do that shadow work. And in a place where so many right now feel disempowered, then we can also be disempowered to do the work on ourselves, feel the magnitude, the overwhelmingness of the global situation, and hide instead in a TV or a good book, or hide in judgment, hide in anger. So I really appreciate that you've brought forward the understanding of shadow work. You also mentioned spiritual practices, and obviously that's what grounds both of our cosmologies as well as our daily practices. If someone is watching this right now who has some of their own spiritual practices already, or maybe is quite new to that as a concept, is rediscovering and reclaiming that in themselves, what might you suggest as spiritual practices that you're working on, or that you would advise to continue to bring that vibration forward?
Well, I think it has to be a very personal choice, because I'm also aware that people listening will come from maybe different belief systems and cultures and ethnic backgrounds. So I think the specifics are for the person themselves to pick, what is right for them. But generally speaking, you mentioned altars a moment ago. I think it's always a good thing to create a focal point, so that actually, spiritually speaking, there is an actual place in your home or wherever you spend a lot of time that is like an anchor where you can go, also where you can go when things get difficult, or you want to speak a prayer. And as you said, I know some people have flats or tiny flats, or they're in shared housing. It could be as little as a little tea light on a shelf, or even if that's not possible and you have animals jumping all over the place, I've sometimes told people get a little shoe box or something and keep things in there, open it up, use it, and close it again. It's not it doesn't need to be physically big, but I think to have a focal point, and also that when you get challenged and things get difficult, that you can go to that place. And for other people, it may not be a candle, it may be in nature, it may be outside, a bench in the park, a place by the river, a particular tree, whatever it may be. But I think it's very important to create a place where you can go that encourages reflection and holds the energy of all the times you've been there before. Because if it is a regular place where you make your pilgrimage, as it were, it also holds all the pilgrimages you've made before. So you can also tap into the strength of the spiritual work you've done before. So it becomes much more than a candle on a shelf or a tree in the park or whatever. So I think that's a big one. And then I think, something will be culturally specific for me in the Northern tradition. It's chanting the runes, pulling the runes for the day, or even asking the indwelling spirits of the runes to be on guard, to be on duty, calling in specific, indwelling spirits of runes for specific situations. And so, working with that. You can do that also, with world maps or maps of locations, and loads and loads of ways of working with that. But that's the Northern tradition specific thing. Not everyone in your audience is going to be a rune magician, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's reminding me. I printed off the map of Ukraine, and that is now currently sitting on my altar with some things on top of it that represent peace and balance. One of the ways that you just mentioned then was being out in nature. It feels like that takes that, I think of what you just talked about as concentric circles. So we've got the focal point of the altar. For me, the focal point of the moment I light the flame on the altar. So that's the very center, which of course has to represent also the very center of me. And then from there, those concentric circles, like that amazing ripple revolution that can really move through the entire web of life. And certainly, I know you live in the city of London, but I'm also very aware that you have some beautiful land and forestry in Sweden, where you go, and one of your titles is a forest witch.
Oh, yes.
And for me, being out the day after the invasion began, then I went to a place that's quite close to where I am in Cornwall, and a place that actually one of the earliest photos that I have of when I was a child. So I'm about 3 there, and I've got my little toy horse and I'm cuddling as I sit on the rocks. And it's an amazing, it's on a ley line, it's very high up. Actually, it's not just on one ley line, it's an intersection between two of the very powerful ley lines that move through Britain, the Mary and the Michael line, and where they intersect, there's amazing both energy that carries through the earth grids, but also that spins out through very many different places. And it was a really windy day, and the first day that we'd had sun in many, many weeks here in Cornwall. And I sat there and lay there on the ley lines and just spoke to the earth, whispered, called from the memory of harmony, the memory of peace, the memory of the warriors. All of our lands have been fought for and defended so many times. True. So the people who have walked along those ley lines, the very walking of their feet, giving both war, peace, love, protection, giving those energies into the soil. So I asked for them to reawaken in me imbalance, but also to reawaken throughout the grid lines of the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's so many ways that we can ground ourselves in the tininess of the focus of our homes out into walking, talking, so much that can be done.
Yeah, because like every domestic task can be a sacred task. You can make yourself a cup of tea and hold a vision of a hot drink for everyone waiting at the border to cross, or as you say, or like working with a map, you can bring in a time travel element. You can like think of, say, if you're working with the Ukraine as an example, they have a very rich Slavic culture, a very rich mythology, incredibly powerful gods, and like outside time that all exists. So you can either use your own active attention to time travel back to when, all of that was, stronger and back up and the people were happier, and really make sure that that vision doesn't get lost with all the negative, devastating images coming up at us over the airwaves now. And also, you can make it an act of will to reinforce that, to see that. And so by doing that, you help preserve that. And, like the scientists do that for places like Iraq as well. Well, we all know what is happening there and like what the culture is like for girls and women and all of it. But it is actually it's where our culture was born. It's the cradle of our civilization. And in ancient Sumeria, that's right there in that area, there was a very different culture. And sometimes just a piece of work I do, where I do the time travel and I reinforce that. And I really, by remembering that and seeing that, it's kind of, I keep alive in the larger constellation around Iraq, that actually there's a very, very different dimension to Iraq. Just not one that ever hits the news right now, but it is there and we can work with that.
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful and powerful. I have a children's book about the Baba Yaga, and that's something that I've pulled out and reread this last while, the concept of the amazing forest spirits, forest mother, the fierce protector and the quiet protector, really holding so much of the power of the feminine that has been chipped away at in our modern cultures, that wildness, the wildness of woman in her power and in her gentleness, the birth and the death aspect. It's a beautiful, beautiful story that inspired my children, boy and girl, when they were young. And of course, that's very much part of that culture. And I know
very
that
much.
you have worked closely with Baba Yaga as well.
You know, she's my long life call. People ask me, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And I say, I want to be Baba Yaga in my hut in the forest. So she's my role model.
That's wonderful. All right, let's just take a moment here. There is something else that you brought forward that I really want to pick up on, and that is you mentioned your son and that he is really feeling the big pain, the big power, the big uncertainty, and that it's affecting his health. And I'm sure that he is not alone in our young folk as they're really being exposed to the very first time to the unfolding torrent of war right in front of their eyes. And of course, so many of them, my daughter's been talking a lot about it, seeing people on TikTok her age that are suddenly sharing these visuals, and ones that are having to run for shelter because bombs are falling as they're actually taking their short videos. You know, suddenly the proximity of it is massive. So recognizing that that's also something that we, in our position of mothers, of parents in general, of carers for children, of carers for the next generation, that there is both the need and the responsibility within us to hold, to anchor, to do what we can to guard and prepare them for meeting these horrific events that are unfolding. So I'd really love you to talk about that. Anything that you can offer people who are watching or listening this, who have children who are really being affected. And let me just qualify that. I don't just mean parents, of course, like so many people have their amazing roles as soul guardians of children, from our teachers to our carers, grandparents. So really understanding this role that we all have in caring for the children of today.
Exactly. Well, a word that I've been using a lot in my work and also in recent interviews is I've shifted from parent to mentor, because like you, I mean, you know, like, yeah, some of us are parents, but also like many people, like, you know, like parents or godparents or concerned neighbors or grandparents, you know, in a larger sense. I think we've got to really get away from the idea that this is about our biological children. Like, you know, all the children in our culture are the children of all of us. They are like our collective children, and collectively they are our future. And I think what is so difficult is, I observe it with my own children, especially with the youngest one here, who's very sensitive and who wants to go into either politics or the Foreign Office, diplomacy. So, I mean, that's an interesting career choice at the moment for a nearly 18-year-old. So I feel it's very important, you know, yes, we need to be with young people and they have to write and navigate the horror. Like there is with social media, there is no way we can keep that away from them. And it comes into the reality in all possible ways. And it wouldn't even be desirable to switch that off. But as you say, it does dissolve the boundary of like location almost. It comes directly onto their screens and into their bedrooms. So then I think it comes back to peace. And as you know, I've worked on this for years, that it is my belief we need to make sure our children have a spiritual toolkit. I think we need to give them lots and lots of freedom. We should not indoctrinate them into a particular faith. I'm not talking about that. But, you know, we also just mentioned earlier, there are like basic spiritual tools that anyone within any faith or belief system can use. So I'm talking in the neutral sense. And I think it is our responsibility to give children a viable spiritual toolkit, or at least to help them themselves develop that for themselves. So that's like a thing will need to be done. And then I think there's a very fine line here, because I see that in my own youngest son, that it can become a kind of 24 obsession where the bad news is just like watching over us all of the time. So I think we need to also help young people to say, okay, yes, we need to be informed, and yes, we care deeply, but also we can generally not make a positive contribution to a situation when we're too much in it all of the time. Sometimes the best contribution is made by taking just one compassionate step back, and then taking stock and asking yourself that many things I cannot do, but what can I do? And that includes the spiritual practices as well. So for young people in general, I feel that young people are having a very tough time, because during the pandemic, they paid a huge price so their elders would stay safe. Young people were put under restrictions that really weren't reasonable for like most of them in terms of what their risk was. But they were told that, you know, if you don't do this, you know, like you may kill your vulnerable grandmother or whatever. So our young people right now have already spent 2 years paying a very significant price, and they've had this message of keeping other people safe. And just as those restrictions are being released, like almost on the same day, I think, the final easing of restrictions, they now find themselves with a war in Europe. You know, so that has a huge impact on them as well. And even, you know, before the pandemic started, the mental health figures for children were alarming. And right now they're through the roof, they're unmanageable, you know, so that's an enormously grave concern, which I try to like work with in my own work. And then I feel that I don't think that we have the resources to give all young people who have struggles right now on the level of like mental or spiritual or emotional health, to give them all specialist mental health treatment. I do not believe that the resources are there, nor do I ever see the government funding it, even if it's very desirable. I don't see it happening, the other priorities. So, and I've thought about this so much. I've literally been lying awake and I think, what are we going to do about this? I think the only way forward is to say that the mental health services, the resources we have, are need to be used for those young people who really need like medication and psychiatric specialist care. And there is a segment of the young population that absolutely needs that, you know, like no question. And it's really, really important that they get that. But I also think there is a very large group of young people who like were anxious before, and then with, you know, with a pandemic and now a war, I mean, it easily flips into anxiety disorder because you get these disempowering messages coming at you the whole time. And I think as you know, the grown-ups of our world, not just the parents, but all of us who care about children, I think we also need to pull our own eyes off the screens for long enough to ask ourselves that question again. Yeah, I mean, yes, you know, I cannot personally do a lot of things in Ukraine right now, or, you know, the limits to what I can do for Ukraine. But we have a population of rather traumatized young people right here on our doorstep. And I believe that, you know, those people who have something to share and are willing to do it should be mentors for young people. And ideally, I would like to see that organized in a more formal way. May have to start as an informal move, but I would really encourage all people, you know, who have something to give to a child, to see, is there a child in your surroundings who's having a tough time? And, you know, even before the pandemic and before this war, I mean, a lot of children are in difficult situations at home. They're in dysfunctional homes. The homes of many children in the UK are like war zones where, you know, violence and abuse goes on. It is not only happening in Ukraine, it's happening much closer to us. So this is like the idea that I've started putting out there, you know, could we just sort of, you know, acknowledge what's happening in terms of child mental health services and how that is, you know, it's completely and totally inadequate. But could we then bring in another vision? And then if we do that, I think then we go to a different way of being in the world, because it would allow, you know, elders to be true elders again, and rather making older people feel they're past their sell by date or they're retired or whatever. You know, these people have tremendous life skills and life experiences. Many of them have been parents or uncles or aunties or teachers or sports coaches or whatever. So there's a whole group of the population there that I think there are many people there who have so many skills and love and compassion to share with children, and people other ages as well, and maybe even people who do not have a biological child, who would quite like to have a special relationship with a child. So from my point of view, there's a completely unplugged resource in our society. And I've really started campaigning to start like teaming that up. How can we bring these two groups together? Well, then I think, you know, we'd be doing a huge service both to our own society, but also to the world at large. And also, you know, we're then building stronger communities when we do that.
Very, very true. Very powerful words. I wonder, Imelda, your words there are both inspiring and I think for many people will be frightening in many ways. You know, when we're invited to really recognize the crisis that is right in front of us, oftentimes in our own families, certainly in our own communities. I'm very aware that people in my smaller and wider communities are working with youth suicide. You know, that literally their children or children within our communities have been so desperate that they have chosen to end their lives. And those are the ones that we might see in the statistics. But of course, the reality is that the anxiety is huge. And almost one of the things that I find alarming is that there is a deep acceptance within the youth culture that there will be many among them who are self-harming, many among them who are on medication, many who are talking openly about suicide. There's a way that there's such a kind of casualness around it, because the reality is too big for the children to hold or for the young people to hold themselves. I wonder, would you lead us in a prayer right now, so that for the people who have listened to these words and maybe feeling it in their own hearts, that we can ground together and feel that place both of our responsibility and of our collective energy about how we can move it forward in some way. I love that vision of yours of connecting all parts of our community in order to support our youth. Does it feel appropriate for you to say a prayer right now?
Let's do that right now, and the words can come as they come.
Yeah.
So this is a prayer for children and young people, always remembering that they are the children and young people of all of us. They belong to all of us collectively. There is one human family. And this prayer is for all the children of the one human family. And my prayer is that we can really see those young people on the level of heart and honesty, that uncomfortable as it is, that we can see you and be fully present to what goes on for you. My prayer is that those adults around you, we are the older ones with a bit more life experience, that we will be guided to hold for you the safe spaces, the rites of passage, the experiences of initiation and transcendence that your souls crave, and that we reclaim that responsibility and that we face up to that. I also want to bear witness to what an extraordinary generation of young people you are. We're at the moment even already seeing several generations, maybe, like coming up through the ranks. And I honor the soul choices that all of you have made to be here at this time, and that is not an accident. So I honor that all of you came with a very unique contribution. You're here for a reason. And the big question is, what is the unique contribution that only you can make? And I thank you for your courage in being here. And I also honor witnessing how difficult it's been for you to be here, and how tempting it may be to say, I'll just go home to the world of spirit where I came from. Please do not do that, and your time for that will come. So for all of you collectively, I, as an older one, admit that my generation, our generation, has failed in some ways, and also has really failed you on many levels. We're not providing for you the kind of holding and experiences that you need. But yet, if there's any force I believe in right now, that there's anything that makes me believe in a different future, a different world and miracles, it's you. It's the young people of our world. And I will be a campaigner and an ambassador for that cause of all of us actually meeting you from the right place and helping you create the world that you want to live in, and helping you do the healing work and the balancing work on all that came before. That is my prayer for young people today.
Just sitting with those words, the energy of them, the form of them, the power of them. Maybe inviting everyone who is watching, listening, to not only feel those intentions, words, understandings held within that prayer, but to be curious as to what you personally can commit to when it comes to being these soul guardians, these mentors of our children. Wow, thank you, Imelda. There was a beautiful, beautiful weaving through the center of this. And I know that there is so much more than we can talk about. And it also feels like actually that's the most important words have been said in that prayer, in that witnessing, in that blessing as well. Big blessing within your words there. So I think that I'm going to bring this to a close, and also leave the potential open for us to talk again about either more of the same or another topic as it's coming forward in our awarenesses, in our hearts. Is there anything else that you would like to say, Imelda?
Maybe, because I know I said it in the prayer, but I feel an urge to just say how important initiation is and rites of passage work, and how in indigenous societies going to war was a way that young people were initiated, but also the cost wasn't so high. They didn't have chemical warfare and the cons that we have, etc., etc. So it was still more a legitimate way of initiating young people. But today there has been that sort of divorce where war has become this humongous thing that's spun out of control. But actually, we need to learn again to offer young people safe rites of passage and to hold safe spaces for initiation, where like key life experiences can occur and they can meet their developmental windows. And I believe that just that fact, if we could do that in addition to the mentoring, that will reduce the level of confusion or not feeling empowered, or even I think young people are flirting with the experiences you mentioned, the suicide or engaging in self-harm. And there's some groups now, young people, where it's almost cool to engage, to have anxiety disorder or to engage in self-harm. It's almost like it's become a rite of passage. And I think these are all examples of what young people are driven to, and we, the older and hopefully a little bit more experienced ones, cannot get our act together and offer young people those same experiences, which are really, quest for transcendence and spiritual connection. And if we can offer that and host that in a safely held way, in a responsible way, I think we're going to be seeing a reduction of, all of these things you mentioned, because there will not be a need to seek it in a negative manifestation if it's offered to you in a safer and higher manifestation. So I suppose those would be my closing words.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I have felt changed from our discussion, and I'm sure that everybody listening will also have understood the transmission of your words as well as the words themselves. So deepest gratitude from me, and I look forward to us being together again, Imelda.
Yeah, let's speak soon again, and thank you so much for having me, for the utter privilege of that. Thank you, Prune.